Roosevelt concentrated on what he called the free risk relief, recovery, and reform. Relief meant help. It came first. People who were starving or about to lose their homes didn't have time to wait for long-term changes to take effect. Something had to be done right away. People don't eat in the long run. A member of the Brain Trust pointed out they eat every day. So many of Roosevelt's projects were known by either initials that they are called the alphabet agencies. 3 of the first relief plans were FARA, the Federal Emergency Relief Agency, CWI, the Civil War Administration, and CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. FARA gave money to people who needed. It also offered job training and tried to create new jobs. By 1945, FARA had helped more than 20 million workers. FARA also tried to make use of the crops that were rotting on the farm. It came up with ways to get food to starving people. And it set up the first national system of school lunches. The CWA created short-term jobs for more than 4 million workers. These workers built and repaired public structures such as roads, schools, parks, bridges, and outhouses. The CCC was aimed at young unemployed men like the hobos. The men went to live in camps and national forests and parks. They planted trees, fought forest fires, and built campgrounds. In the evening, many earned high school diplomas. One of Roosevelt's first acts was close down all the banks. Then he reopened only the stable ones. This gave consumers faith in the banks. They started using them again. In the first speech in his first speech as president, Roosevelt told the American people, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Now he was making them believe that. Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was a very unusual first lady. She helped her husband with the work of running the country. In the past, first ladies had usually stayed in the background, but Eleanor made speeches pushing her husband's ideas. She also worked for women's rights and racial equality. Equality. She had her own popular newspaper column called My Day. She received as many as 300,000 letters a year from Americans who looked on her as a friend. Many were from children. They asked for a bicycle, a typewriter, money for the doctor, or decent clothing so that they could go to school. Eleanor couldn't answer all these letters personally, but she tried to set up programs that would provide for children and help them stay in school. The second R stood for recovery. This referred to wars that meant to jumpstart the economy. The most important of these created the NRA, National Recovery Administration. It encouraged businesses to agree on a minimum wage, a limit on working hours, and an end to child labor. Only businesses that joined the NRA could display the NRA eagle. Most businesses wanted to show they were cooperating. This was one of the first times the American government ever tried to control the relationship between workers and employers. The AAA and Agricultural Adjustment Act paid farmers to limit how much food they produced so it wouldn't go to waste. The Homeowners Loan Corporation helped keep people from losing their homes. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority built dams on Tennessee River, bringing electricity and irrigation to an area which had lacked them. It still exists today. Roosevelt's final R stood for reform. These were acts meant to make sure a Great Depression would never happen again. He tried to control the kind of risks banks were allowed to take, and he made sure that the stock market gave investors complete information. The controls Roosevelt put in place lasted until 1999. Then Congress ended many of them. Some economists think this may have helped cut the financial crisis that shook the United States in 2008. The sweeping changes Roosevelt made in his first 100 days were called the New Deal. Almost immediately, they produced a surge of hope. Roosevelt started giving informal that's what it said.
Yeah.
Fireside chats on the radio. Many Americans thought of him as a friend who really cared about them. Since so many people trusted Roosevelt, they started to have faith in the economy again. They were no longer afraid to hire workers or spend money. Unemployment started to go down, but after the excitement of the first 100 days, things did not always run smoothly. The growth of labor movement. The American labor movement came of age during the Great Depression. Critics said the movement was being run by communists. Some people even accused President Roosevelt for being one in 1917. A communist revolution had overthrown the government of Russia. The Russians claimed that they were putting all the power of the government in the hands of the workers. Some people in the American labor movement were inspired by the communist ideas, but many were only interested in helping workers who were paid wages too low to live on. During the Depression, workers banded together into labor unions to give them more bargaining power with their employers. Many strikes took place. This means the workers refused to do their jobs or let anyone else do them. If all the workers agreed to strike, they could shut down a factory until their demands were met. Roosevelt angered rich businessmen by supporting the union. If I went to work in a factory, the first thing I do is join a union, he said. Chapter 8, The Dust Bowl. Even as hope started to grow, a new crisis was beginning. The timing could not have been worse. Since 1930, it had barely rained in the central part of the country. Farms there were in trouble. Crops died in the field. Farm animals that couldn't find enough grass to eat starved. Then came something even worse. During the boom of the 20s, farmers in the Great Plains had pulled up the grasses to plant crops. This left bare soil. Now the fields were standing empty, with no roots to hold the dry dirt down. It blew away in huge dust storms. Day turned into night. Night. People could barely breathe, even indoors. Cars, houses, and entire farms were buried under huge drifts of sand. Born as the moon.
After.
Okay.
You skipped
After a dust storm, farming looked as dry and barren as the moon. In 1935, farming community had its Black Day. Just as the stock market had 6 years earlier, Sunday, April 14th, saw such terrible dust storm that it was called Black Sunday. The area destroyed by the storm was nicknamed the Dust Bowl. People developed just pneumonia.
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 It's pneumonia. It's silent P.
Pneumonia. When their lungs filled with dust. Children were lost on the prairie and burned alive in dust. We live with the dust, eat it, sleep with it. Amir wrote, as far away as New York City, the lights sometimes had to be turned on the middle of the day because dust was so thick. Look at them! Roosevelt's government tried to help recover the land. They stopped farmers from plowing up so much grassland. Millions of bare acres were planted with grass. The CCC planted more than 200 million trees to act as windbreaks. And the government hired experts to teach the farmers about ways of growing crops that would not harm the soil. Some farmers were unwilling to listen to the advice from outsiders, so the government began paying them to try the new method. Such efforts did help, but it was too late for the many farmers. About 1/4 of the farm families in the Dust Bowl lost everything. Many piled into their cars and drove west to California, where there wasn't a drought. There they hoped to find work on farms because so many of them came from Oklahoma. They were scornfully known as Okies, even if they came from Texas or Arkansas. They found that there were very few jobs to be had, even in California, and they were not welcome. The migrants had always worked hard, but many people assumed they were bums and despised them. Others resented them for trying to take the few jobs still available. The Los Angeles police chief sent 125 policemen to California border to turn them away before they could enter the state. Dorothy Lange. In 1935, the photographer Dorothy Lange was hired by one of Roosevelt's alphabet agencies, the Farm Security Administration (FSA). Her job was to photograph migrant workers. Her pictures were offered free to newspapers around the country. She hoped that seeing the misery these people live in would make the nation more sympathetic. Her most famous photograph is known as the Migrant Mother. It shows a 32-year-old woman with 2 children at a camp in California. The woman told the Lange she had just sold the tire from her car to get food. California was suffering from the Depression like every other state. It couldn't deal with all the homeless families showing up every day. Hundreds of eager workers competed for every farming job. This drove wages down so low that nobody could earn enough to live on. The workers followed the harvest from place to place, living in crowded, disease-ridden camps. The government tried to help, but it built 13 model camps. These camps were clean with running water and were managed by those who lived in them. But they could house only a small number of people, and they could not provide jobs. Even as the rest of the country slowly recovered, the migrants remained desperate until the end of the Depression. Chapter 9. More Big Changes. In 1945, Roosevelt began a second wave of reforms. It was meant to lessen a huge gap between the rich and the poor. New laws tried to protect Americans who were old, weak, sick, or out of work. One of the most important was the Social Security Act. It gave workers money after they retired. It also provided money for people who were employed or
unemployed.
Unemployed or couldn't work. And for widows and
Widows.
Widows and orphans to support his programs, Roosevelt increased income taxes on the richest citizens. The NLRA, National Labor Relations Act, tried to give workers more power, guaranteed them the right to join unions and to strike if necessary. And it required employers to bargain with the union. A 1935 act created the very successful WPA, Works Progress Administration. This picked up where the CWA left off. Workers were hired to build or restore libraries, highways, post offices, museums, and playgrounds. Many WPA projects are in use today in towns all over the country. The WPA made a special effort to employ artists, writers, and musicians. WPA murals, paintings on walls, can still be seen in many public buildings. Well-known artists such as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Jacob Lawrence worked in WPA projects. The WPA also produced a famous series of guidebooks to each of the United States. Some people thought Roosevelt was sneaking communist ideas into the U.S. government, but most of the country was behind him. He easily won re-election in 1936, carrying all but 2 states. However, the Supreme Court thought that some of what FDR was doing went against Constitution. In 1945, the court had ruled against some of Roosevelt's key recovery ideas. This was a huge blow to him. The 9 justices of the Supreme Court served for life. Served for life. So Roosevelt could not get rid of the ones who disagreed with him. Instead, in 1937, he tried to add more justices. He wanted to pack the court with supporters who would outvote the judges against him. This time, Roosevelt had gone too far. Congress did not let him pack the court. However, within a few years, several justices retired or died. So Roosevelt was able to fill the court with his allies anyway.
Allies
anyway. In 1940, Roosevelt was able to fill the court with...
No, in 1940, Roosevelt ran...
1940, Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term. There was no law that said he couldn't, but no president ever had. The Democratic National Convention was held in Chicago. Roosevelt wrote a letter telling the delegates, the people who choose the candidate, that it wasn't up to them. They would decide if he would step aside or not. Suddenly a voice shouted, "We want Roosevelt. The world wants Roosevelt." He was nominated right away. by huge majority. The voice was later discovered to have come from Chicago's superintendent of sewer.
Very good. That's a big word.
We're all saying we want Roosevelt. Chapter 10, War. Roosevelt was elected to his third term. He had become president by promising to end the Depression. Things were getting better, but the Depression still wasn't over. However, the world events soon kept him from being able to focus only on America's economy. World War II had begun in Europe in 1939. The Nazis in Germany and their supporters in Italy and Japan were invading other countries. They seemed to be threatening the entire world. Many Americans hoped to stay out of the war. Roosevelt promised them that he would do everything possible to prevent Americans from having to fight, but he probably realized that America would eventually be drawn into battle. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and the United States was forced to declare war. Roosevelt's point to end the Depression had always been to create as many jobs as possible, but he had never been able to offer enough jobs for everyone. Now, with the coming of war, unemployment disappeared. More and more men joined the army. Other people were needed to fill their jobs, and a huge number of workers were needed to build ships, airplanes, and weapons to fight the war. Suddenly, there were a few workers, but not too many. The Brooklyn Navy Yard built and repaired battleships. It employed more than 75,000 people, working on about 1,500 ships a year. All over the country, places like the Navy Yard and Brooklyn needed as many workers as they could get. They sent out trucks with loudspeakers telling people to get a job and help out with the war effort. Women and minorities suddenly had new opportunities. They were needed to fill jobs that had not been open to them before the war. Popular posters showed Rosie the Riveter, a proud female construction worker. World War II was a terrible time in the world's history. It brought new kinds of suffering unknown in the 30s, but economically, it put an end to the Great Depression. By the time the United States emerged from the war, it had become the richest nation on earth. Chapter 11, The Power of the President. In the years before the war, Roosevelt used more power than any other American president ever had when the country wasn't at peace. In times of war, Congress may vote to give the president extra power so he can deal with the crisis, but when he was elected, FDR asked Congress to think of the battle against the Great Depression as war. He needed to be given the kind of power that other presidents only had in wartime. He wanted broad executive power to wage war against the emergency. As great as the power that would be given to me, and if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. Some historians think FDR went beyond what Constitution allows. Even some of his supporters have called him a helpful
dictator.
What?
Dictator. See? Dictator.
How many pages are in here?
Just 2 more. Come on.
Oh yeah, just 2 more pages. Just 2 more pages on. A director is a leader.
A dictator.
A dictator is a leader of a country who does exactly what he wants without getting approval from anyone else. Roosevelt completely changed what the United States expects from the government. Before him, most Americans believed the government had no business getting involved in people's lives. Roosevelt made them think that the government is responsible for making sure all the citizens have the basic things they need to survive, like food, education, and a roof over their heads. As the economist Arthur Schlesinger pointed out, it is impossible now to imagine an America that offers no help to Americans who can find themselves through no fault of their own in economic or social distress. The Great Depression was one of the worst times in nation's history. People were afraid the country might collapse. A journalist wondered, would it be necessary soon to organize our families against the will to fight physically, for food, to keep shelter or hold a position. Roosevelt realized that the huge danger that the country faced during his first 100 days in office. A visitor said to him, Mr. President, if your program succeeds, you'll be the greatest president in American history. If it fails, you will be the worst one. If it fails, Roosevelt answered, I'll be the last one. Fortunately, that didn't happen. FDR's last days. In 1944, Roosevelt was elected president for a 4th term. He wanted to be sure that when World War II ended, the world would be a safer and more peaceful place. He helped to create the United Nations. This was designed as a meeting place for countries all over the world. They could get together and work out the problems by talking instead of fighting. By then, Roosevelt's health was failing. Roosevelt only survived for 3 months of his 4th term. His vice president, Harry Truman, finished the term for him. When FDR died, Americans mourned him as the man who has saved the nation. The New York Times wrote, men will thank God on their knees 100 years now that Franklin D. Roosevelt was in the White House. Harry Truman won the next election and served as president until 1953.
Awesome job.